My next patron question is from Joey, who wanted to know if a particular children's author is considered too untouchable. As you know, Dr. Seuss's books have received film adaptations, but they're far from being considered great films or even good ones. Such problems with these include Seuss himself being such a singular talent with such a unique point of view that he's hard to imitate, and his stories being hard to adapt. But even with the best efforts of the filmmakers working on them, any film adaptation that tries to expand the original stories or adds changes to them just does not completely satisfy the more hardcore Seuss fans and purists. I mean, I don't see lots of people complaining about the changes and or expansions done to the various movie versions of public domain stories, like Snow White, Pinocchio, Cinderella, etc. And both Shrek and Cloud of Chance Meatballs were based on kids' books of the same name, and the filmmakers behind those two films did lots of changes and or expansions for their respective adaptations, yet I don't see anyone complaining about them. But when that same process happens to a movie version of a Dr. Seuss book, there are always going to be people who complain about the changes and or expansions. Even Horton Hears a Who, the most critically acclaimed of these adaptations, has its fair share of detractors too. Are the Dr. Seuss books too much of a sacred cow? To start off, I do think a big part of the protectiveness over Dr. Seuss and his stories comes from the extra attachment people have to them. I myself was a big reader of Dr. Seuss books as a child and will often come into an adaptation of his work having that connection to them and hoping his work will be respected. However, I also recognize there will be changes when expanding the book into a feature-length film. It all depends on whether the changes respect the original story while still being creative and inventive. I'm sure there are other people in the same boat who don't want to see his stories turned into something undeserving of his name. Case in point is the live-action Cat in the Hat movie. While I know it has developed a cult following since its release, even its fans have admitted that there's little Seussian about its script, with the gross-out jokes, blatant product placement, including for Universal Studios theme parks, and other storytelling choices. Although in addition to me not finding the movie very funny, I find one of the biggest problems is how obnoxious the cat is. You cannot really blame Seuss fans for being bothered by that movie and how it adapted the source material. Even his widow, the late Audrey Geisel, famously hated that film. Then you have the interesting case of the live-action adaptation of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This one is more on the divisive side, since you have people find it an insult to the book and don't like the humor, while others don't mind the additions to the story and enjoy it primarily for Jim Carrey's performance. I think another thing that plays into the reaction to some of these adaptations is that there were animated specials produced during Seuss's lifetime, and there's a feeling that the books are better suited to being about 20 minutes rather than stretched out to 90 minutes. Dr. Seuss devised his books with a specific rhyming scheme, and a movie is going to naturally add more dialogue, which they feel might run counter to what he wanted. I think that degree of protectiveness also comes from the fact that he's not around anymore to voice his views on the matter of these adaptations. Joey mentioned Shrek as an example of an adaptation where people did not seem bothered by the additions. William Steig, who wrote the book, was alive when that film was being made, and even offered a few suggestions to DreamWorks while it was being developed, although that was apparently the extent of his involvement. Steig was reportedly unsure how he would feel about the movie before he watched it, but he ultimately loved it. I think it also helps that Shrek is already a fairly farcical book, and the movie stayed true to that spirit. On the other hand, you do have authors who famously did not think highly of the film adaptations of their books, but people still love those movies anyway. Examples of this include Roald Dahl in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, P.L. Travers in Mary Poppins, and Michael Ender in The Never-Ending Story. Now, the interesting thing is that Dr. Seuss was involved in a feature film based on his books that was never made. I already discussed this in another video specifically about the unmade Oh the Places You Will Go adaptation, but Seuss himself took that book and expanded it into a screenplay with new characters, while also including the Cat in the Hat as a major protagonist. So he was not entirely opposed to the idea of movies adapted from his books. Of course, it all depends on the execution and what people want to see from those adaptations. Although there is one Dr. Seuss adaptation that stretched out one of his stories that even the purists approved of. That was the Green Eggs and Ham series, which was widely praised for how it adapted the story and expanded on the characters. While I'm sure there are some nitpickers out there, they seem to be few and far between. Jared Stern and the team behind the show seem to find the right elements to adapt the book that retain the creativity associated with Dr. Seuss. Ultimately, I think Dr. Seuss is such a respected figure, and his books such a major part of people's lives, I understand why many are extra critical when it comes to how his books are adapted. After all, for many, these are stories that taught them how to read or imparted good moral lessons to them. Oh, The Place You Will Go is literally a book that's become tradition to give to recent graduates. You want the filmmakers and studio to take extra care of them and make sure these beloved children's characters are not looking at a garden tool and calling it a dirty hoe. Thank you for your question, Joey.